Happy Friday. Thanks for joining me. I'm Carla with Raised to Walk. It's time for our weekly Bible study, and we are going to be continuing our Easter series today with the account in Exodus 24 when the elders of Israel actually had a covenant meal with God on Mount Sinai, which I think that is just one of the most wild accounts in the Bible. So anyway, but before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words, and on Tuesdays I publish videos about books, and then on Fridays I host a live Bible study on Raised to Walk and on Instagram, and then I upload that on Saturday to YouTube. So if you want to join in on those things, be sure to like and subscribe so you can get updates of notifications. Now you can also go, if you want a little bit more in-depth resources, you can also go to my website at raisedtowalk.org, and I have, especially on Easter, I have quite a few more resources on that if you'd like to explore that. So, what we've been doing since the beginning of the year, we started in on the parables of Jesus, and then we stopped for a minute, and then we had a Bible study on Purim, and then now we're starting in on a series of Bible studies going down into Easter. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, and you see this a lot, if you're watching and paying attention to what people say, Easter is obviously a really big deal with the church, right? So there's 2 times of the year when people that don't come to church at any other time come to church, and that's Christmas and Easter. But our society as a whole, really, we're, whatever we were to begin with, we're really, I'd have to say, not a Christian nation anymore. And it's not even so much like postmodernism, knows what Christianity says and they reject it. We're not even postmodern anymore. We are actually, if you think about it, we're really more of a pagan nation now, because people don't even know what the Bible is and what it says. And so when we're looking at that in terms of Christianity, you can't assume that you know where somebody is. You can't assume that somebody knows the meaning of the resurrection, or what the Bible says, or even what Jesus says. And people really have never even not only read the whole Bible, but even, I don't even know if we could say that even people in the church have all actually even read even the Gospels, just reading it straight through. Because sometimes what they say about Jesus is like, you obviously haven't read it, because you cherry pick what you want, and you don't really, and you're ignoring all the rest. The other thing I will say, this may be controversial to some people, but how you read something and the translation that you read actually affects your understanding. So in my class on the history of the church that I just finished, and I didn't know this until then, that the Latin translation, so the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and then the Bible, the whole Bible, the Hebrew Tanakh and the Greek New Testament, were translated into into Latin, and that was the Latin Vulgate by Jerome. There's a passage in the Bible, like we as Protestants say, okay, well, why do Catholics believe that you have to do, we think that they believe that you have to earn your salvation, which that's actually a misconception. That's not actually the official Catholic doctrine. We just have a misunderstanding of it. But the Latin Vulgate actually translated repent as do penance. So, and that's a different thing, and that formed many of the doctrines of the church up until the Reformation, where some of those things started to change. So, I've been thinking about this. I honestly, I have, I don't think I've mentioned it in my Bible studies, but I'll just be honest with you. I hate the Message translation. I absolutely hate it. It is not a translation. It's more like Eugene Peterson's commentary. I said this in my church Bible study once, and one of my pastors said, well, there's a lot of people that like the Message. And I'm like, I don't care. I hate it. I think it's horrible. I had one of my friends that came and visited my church one time, and she was, she's not anymore, but at the time she thought she was being Torah observant and in that like Hebrew roots kind of thing. She's not there anymore. But anyway, we go and we sit into the worship center, and the pastor says, okay, and this is from the Message. And she looked at me, and I was like, oh my goodness. I said, I've never heard him quote from Message before. He usually uses New American Standard Translation. But when you look at, if you do a comparison between the Message and so many other passages, it sometimes, not only does it seems to trivialize a passage, but sometimes it actually says the exact opposite of what the actual text says. I mean, it is not, I know some people like it. If you want to use it as sort of like a study aid, I guess maybe it can kind of be good sometimes. I just stay away from it entirely. And I'll be honest with you, there are some people that if that's all they're quoting and that's all that they're using for verses, I just can't even follow them. I can't, because I hate that translation. So the point of the story is we need to be reading our Bible, and we need to be reading a good translation, and it's good to make sure that you have good resources, because like I said, there's so many people out there that really don't really have an understanding of Christianity. And I think we need to start in our church, because there's been studies that have shown that only 30% of people that go to churches regularly actually have a saving faith. And it's 33% for Protestant churches, 30% for Catholic churches. So there's not a whole lot of difference between the two. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this series on Easter, because there are people out there that really don't know the reason for Easter. They don't know what it is, and they don't, and I don't think very few people understand the full context of it. And so that's why I started where I did, where we started back in Genesis and in the fall, and why Jesus had to die on the cross for us anyway. Then last week we went into the binding of Isaac, or God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and what the purpose and point of that was. So this week we're starting into, and it's going to be kind of a little bit out of order because next week we're going to be talking about Passover. Passover actually starts before this, but I wanted to do this just because, so we can kind of understand the reason that the true Passover had to occur. So just to do a recap, God had promised Abraham that he would make him into a great nation, and he also told him ahead of time that his descendants would be in Egypt for 430 years. Then they would come out. The people that oppressed them would be punished, and he would give them the land. So he told Abraham ahead of time. We're not going to be going in depth over this, but the Israelites were in Egypt for over 400 years, and it came a time when they were oppressed, and it said that when they cried out to God, that God heard them and he sent them a deliverer. And so it's that crying out, this asking God for deliverance, that he responds to. And so Moses comes, there's 10 plagues. The 10th plague is the death of the firstborn, and it's after that finally breaks the pride and the barrier that Pharaoh has to letting them go, and he lets the Israelites go. This is a whole nother study which we're not going to get into today, that each of the 10 plagues is actually against one of the gods of Egypt. I think it's really interesting that when you look at those 10 plagues, this is all I'm going to say about it, because I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but when you get into the 10 plagues, that the first 3 actually affected the Israelites and the Egyptians, both. It was after the third one, which was it was actually the god of chaos, that it was, once that plague came, then the other 7 didn't affect the Israelites. So 1 through 3 affected both. 4 through 9 affected only the Egyptians. But the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn, which was when they put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of their home, that affected whoever chose to do that. So if the Egyptians had done that, they would have been covered too. So, and that is what we're going to be talking about next week. But when they came out of Egypt, they, God brought them, out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, and they're in the wilderness. And it says, so I'm not going to read all of this, but we're going to start in Exodus 19. It says that it was exactly 2 months after they came after they left Egypt, that they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. And so Moses went on the mountain to appear before God, and this is where God is going to be giving them the instructions. He says, give this to the people, and it says, now if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples of the earth, for all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is a message you must give to the people of Israel. So he goes down, he tells the elders of the people everything God commanded him, and all the people responded We will do everything the Lord has commanded. So Moses brought the people's answer back to the Lord. So God says, this is what I'm going to do. Moses gives a message. They agree. So then Moses goes back. And it says, this is in verse 9. So I will come in a thick cloud. So the presence of God is literally coming to the mountain. And then they're supposed to purify it and cleanse themselves. This is, with water. And then it says in verse 12, mark off a boundary around the mountain. Warn the people, be careful, do not go up on the mountain, even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountains will certainly be put to death. No one may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. So no one could come near God because there was this sin. So this is our first Bible study on why Jesus had to die on the cross. It's because of separation, and we can't, the unholy cannot come near a holy God. So Moses went down to the people. He consecrated them for worship. That's in verse 14. And they washed their clothes. He said, get ready for the third day. And then on the third day, the cloud came down on the mountain. And there was a long, loud blast from a ram's horn. And all the people trembled. And Moses then led them to the camp to meet with God. And then they stood at the foot of the mountain. All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the ram's horn grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God thundered his reply. The Lord came down on top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses climbed the mountain. And then again, God tells them not to go near the boundary, even come near the base of it. They had to stay away from the mountain. And then in verse 24, it says, go down and bring Aaron up with you. In the meantime, do not let the priests or the people break through to approach the Lord, or he will break out and destroy them. So when there was the temple worship, they had to, there were some very specific requirements that the priests had to fulfill in order to only the high priest could go into the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, and that was only on the Day of Atonement, and he had to purify himself before that. So there was always this separation. Even with this communion, there was with God, showing his presence to Israel, there was still this separation. As we talked about in the first Bible study, that it's for that communion. It's so that we can be in communion with God again. Okay, so then we're going to chapters 20 and 21. Now, this is where God gives the 10 Commandments, but some people just think that God only gave 10 Commandments. He didn't. There was a lot more than just the 10 Commandments. He pretty much gives instructions for every area of life. And so he talks about how to operate in business, how we're supposed to live in community. It talks about, respecting the rights of others, and then how we're supposed to treat our families, and then also, how we're supposed to operate in justice. And so as God's imagers, we're his representatives, and so we are supposed to be a reflection of that. And this here, and then in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it gives a lot more details about this. It shows us how to do that. And I think that sometimes in the church we kind of skip over those, especially the ones like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, because we think it doesn't apply to us. And it does apply to us, because specific things may not apply to us now, because God was giving them specific instructions to live in the culture that they were in at the time. And so, at the time they had slaves because that was, they didn't have credit. If somebody didn't have money or food or a way to live, sometimes they would, go and serve, like another person. And it was more of an economic system rather than what we consider like modern slavery. And so, but God was giving them instructions on how to live rightly, like within their economic system. God was telling them how to be God's imagers. And a lot of the things that he told them, in these instructions was counterculture. It wasn't something that, slaves weren't seen as someone that you had to give care and consideration to. but God said that you do. You treat them well. You don't abuse them. You don't abuse your workers. Same thing with foreigners. There's same prejudices against foreigners as there is today. And God told you treat the foreigner exactly as you treat the citizen. So this is how God's standards don't change, and so we have to. Some of the specifics may not be applicable, because again, that was relative to that culture, but the underlying principle is. And so we have to think about, okay, so how does this living with integrity, how do we do that in our culture today? And then in verse 14, then in chapter 23, it talks about the 3 festivals. And so I talked about this in another Bible study. I can't remember which one it was, but that when God gave these instructions for the festivals, that they had to come to a single place in the temple in Jerusalem. And so it wasn't only for worship, but it was for fellowship and community. And so everyone was stopping what they were doing, taking a time out of their life, and they were coming together to worship God together as a community in Jerusalem. And so there were 3 festivals when they were to do that. This is in verse 14. Each year you must celebrate these 3 festivals in my honor. First, celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days the bread you eat must be made without yeast, just as I commanded you. So yeast is actually, as all of these things, all the festivals and all of these things are, they're a type, they're a foreshadowing of, it's a physical illustration of a spiritual truth. And so the yeast represents sin. And so what God is saying is that any offering that you make to me has to be without sin. Okay, so celebrate this festival annually at the appointed time in early spring in the month of Abib. So that's actually known as Nisan today. Okay. For that is the anniversary of your departure from Egypt. No one may appear before me without an offering. Second, celebrate the festival of harvest when you bring me the first crops of your harvest. All this we're going to be talking about in the next couple weeks, going into Easter. And finally, celebrate the festival of final harvest at the end of the harvest season, when you have harvested all the crops from your fields. All of these, at these 3 times each year, every man in Israel must appear before the sovereign, the Lord. Okay, so then I'm going to skip down to verse 20, and this is God's promise. He's like, if you follow me, this is my promise to you. See, I am sending an angel before you to protect you on your journey and lead you safely to the place I have prepared for you. Pay close attention to him and obey his instructions. Do not rebel against him, for he is my representative, and he will not forgive your rebellion. But if you are careful to obey him, following all my instructions, then I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will oppose those who oppose you. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, so you may live there, and I will destroy them completely. You must not worship the gods of these nations or serve them in any way or imitate their evil practices. Instead, you must utterly destroy them and smash their sacred pillars. You must serve only the Lord your God. If you do, I will bless you with food and water, and I will protect you from illness. There will be no miscarriages or infertility in your land, and I will give you long, full lives. So I think with in the Western Church, like in the Protestant Western Church, we have a tendency to spiritualize everything. But that's the other thing that I think it's really helpful to read the Old Testament, because we see how physical and actual God is. He gives us very practical promises that he promises that he's a good God. He's not just saying, do you see anything in here so far that he's talking about eternal life? No, he's talking about, I am your God today. He is a present God. He is a protector. He is a provider. He is a healer today. Not someday in a future world, but today. And that's what this promise is. Okay, and in verse 27, I will send my terror ahead of you and create panic among all the nations whose land you invade. And it didn't strike me until I just read this, but that's kind of what we're seeing today, isn't it? We're seeing that this panic, it's so easy for things to create a panic. And I've noticed that, like people who don't have, there's some people who are kind of walking around in fear. You can see that on social media, and then there's people that, are, whatever comes, we'll get through it. We'll just keep moving on. And you just kind of see where people's hope is right now, don't you? I will make all your enemies turn and run. I will send terror ahead of you to drive out. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. He's repeating this. The Canaanites, the Hivites, the Canaanites, and Hittites, but I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals would multiply and threaten you. I will drive them out a little at a time until your population has increased enough to take possession of the land, and I will fix your boundaries from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the eastern wilderness to the Euphrates River. I will hand over to you the people now living in the land, and you will drive them out ahead of you. Make no treaties with them or their gods. They must not live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me. If you serve their gods, you will be caught in the trap of idolatry. Okay, so we're coming to chapter 24. So this is kind of setting the stage. So they've gone to Sinai. God has said, I'm going to give you these instructions. If you follow my instructions, I'm going to bless you. The people agree, right? So he gives them these instructions. We're in chapter 24. And then the Lord instructed Moses, come up here and bring along Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of Israel's elders. All of you must worship them from a distance. Only Moses is allowed to come near to the Lord. The others must not come near, and none of the other people are allowed to climb up on the mountain with him. Then Moses went down to the people and repeated all the instructions that the Lord had given him. So again, he's confirming this, right? And I want you to notice this. There's no compulsion here. He's giving them the opportunity. He's presenting it, but the people have a choice of whether they accept it or reject it. Okay, all the people answered with one voice, we will do everything the Lord has commanded. Then Moses carefully wrote down all the Lord's instructions. Early the next morning, Moses got up and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. He set up 12 pillars, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent some of the young Israelites men to present burnt offerings and to sacrifice bulls as a peace offering to the Lord. Moses drained half the blood from these animals into basins. The other half he splattered against the altar. So what he's doing here is he's sanctifying. What he's first doing is he's sanctifying the space, right? Then he took the book of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. Again, they all responded, we will do everything the Lord has commanded. We will obey. So again, this is they are agreeing to this. Okay, then, so they've heard the instructions, they're agreeing. Then he took the book, then Moses took the blood from the basin and splattered it over the people, declaring, look, this blood confirms the covenant the Lord has made with you in giving you these instructions. Okay, so they're coming to agreement, saying we will obey. Abraham sanctifies the space with a blood sacrifice, and then he sacked the people with this blood sacrifice, right? Okay. Then Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel climbed up to the mountains. There they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there seemed to be a surface of brilliant blue lapis lazuli, as clear as the sky itself. And though these nobles of Israel gazed upon God, he did not destroy them. And they ate a covenant meal, eating and drinking in his presence. That's a wild story, isn't it? That they went up on the mountain and they had a meal with God. And this account, like under his feet there seemed to be a surface of brilliant blue lapis lazuli. I have a book review on the Spirit of the Rainforest by Mark Andrew Ritchie, and it's an account of a tribe in the Amazon rainforest that literally can see in the spirit, and they would see that when their children died, they would see, it's like this, they called it like these evil spirits would come and they could see the spirits of their children going up, and what they almost called it like going up through like an ocean, like that. They saw it. They saw when the missionaries came and described heaven to them, like, we know that place, we've seen it. So anyway, that is but just think about what that would have been like. But let's look at this just a little bit before. God has said you can't even come near to the mountain. You can't even come near to where I am, or else you're going to die. It's the holiness of God, this presence when we are unclean and when we aren't sanctified by the blood. It is God is like as a consuming fire, right? We see that image of the fire. We just cannot be in communion with him. So Then in verse 12, then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain, stop there, and I will give you the tablets of stone on which I have inscribed the instructions and commands so that you can teach the people. So Moses and his assistant Joshua set out, and Moses climbed up on the mountain of God. Then Moses told the elders, stay here and wait for us until we come back. Aaron and Hur are here with you. If anyone has a dispute while I am gone, consult with them. Then Moses climbed up on the mountain, and a cloud rolled over it. So again, this is the presence of God. And the glory of the Lord settled on the Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, the Lord called to Moses from inside the cloud. To the Israel at the foot of the mountain, the glory of the Lord appeared at the summit like a consuming fire. Then Moses disappeared into the cloud. As he climbed higher up the mountain, he remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So this is, as we talked about in the first Bible study in this series, the purpose is God. We are created to be in communion with God, and it's because of our willfulness and our sin that we are separated from God. And so God has to make a way for us to be in unity with Him. Last week we talked about the sacrifice of Isaac. We talked about how it's a bigger picture than just one man and his son. That it's about bringing all of the earth and all the nations under the authority of God. And so here we have a situation where people have said, okay, well, this is kind of continuing the story and giving us a little bit more detail. And people have said, okay, well, this is giving the people of Israel opportunity just by following His instructions. And so this is through this. If it's just on their own, following His instructions on His own, then they should be in communion. But we see even in there that there has to be this blood atonement for this fellowship, right? So when I was reading this, I was preparing for this morning, actually, I was thinking, okay, well, the logical thing is and the parallel would be the Last Supper, right? But the Young's literal translation, it's kind of like the Holy Spirit was highlighting it, go read it there. And so I went and read it, and the thing that God highlighted to me was Moses cometh in. This is in Young's literal translation. It was translated in 1898, so the language is obviously a little different. But Moses cometh in, recounted for the people of all the words of Jehovah, all the judgments, and all the people answer one voice, and say, all the words which Jehovah hath spoken, we will do. And what really stood out to me when I read it in that translation was the one voice. The one voice. So it's coming together in unity. And a friend gave me this. This is actually it's Hebrew comment. It's rabbinic commentary on this passage. And on that verse, that's in verse 3 in chapter 24. And it says, the unanimity which the Israelites here pledged themselves to the divine worship partakes of the sublime. Here he says, we willingly forget for a moment how little they remain faithful to this promise, even in the time immediately following, because right after this is when they worship the golden calf. So even though they've had this experience, they've seen the presence of God, they've experienced all these things, God's deliverance, His provision, they still can't even manage to stay faithful for just even a little bit. So what that one voice really stands out to me is in John chapter 17. This is right before the crucifixion, and Jesus prays for not only for His disciples but for us, for all believers. He says, I have revealed to you the times I have revealed to you the ones you gave me from this world. They were always yours. You gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything I have is a gift from you. For I have passed on to them the message you gave me. They accepted it and know that I came from you, and they believe you sent me. My prayer is not for this world, but for those you have given me, because they belong to you. All who are mine belong to you, and you have given them to me, so they bring me glory. Now I am departing from the world, They are staying in this world, but I am coming to you. Holy Father, you have given me your name. Now protect them by the power of your name so that they will be united just as we are. During my time here, I protected them by the power of the name you gave me. I guarded them so that not one was lost except the one headed for destruction, as the scriptures foretold. Now I am coming to you. I told them many things while I was with them in this world so that they would be filled with my joy. I have given them your word, and the world hates them because they do not belong to this world, just as I do not belong to the world. I am not asking you to take them out of this world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. Make them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth. Just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world, and I give myself as a holy sacrifice for them so they can be made holy by your truth. I'm praying not only for these disciples, but for all who will ever believe in me through their message. I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one, as you are in me, Father, and I am in you, and they may be in us so that the world will believe you sent me. I have given them the glory you gave me so that they may be one as we are one. I am in them and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. Father, I want these whom you have given me to be with me where I am. Then they can see all the glory you gave me because you loved me even before the world began. O righteous Father, the world doesn't know you, but I do, and these disciples know you sent me. I have revealed you to them, and I will continue to do so. Then your love for me will be in them, and I will be in them. So this is, Jesus' prayer for us was that we would be one. We would be united in unity. And sometimes I think that, particularly in the U.S., we have this view of religion as individual, where it's like it is a personal relationship, but we think that personal relationship also means individual relationship. And that's really not the gospel. And that's really not God's whole plan. So, Moses, that was individualism was the question. It was the answer before the cross. So Moses, this is in Exodus 33:11, it says that the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. The Bible also says that Abraham was a friend to God. Those were those individual relationships. But what we see in not only in Jesus' prayer here, but also in the epistles of the New Testament, that it's about community. That he's saying that they are one just as you and I are one. So, in the Shema it says, Hear, Israel, the Lord your God is one. That's not Yahid, which means a unitary one. It means Ihad, which is a composite unity. And so that's God's will for us, that we are a composite unity, that we are Ihad just as He is, and that we are in Him. So this is, in Revelation, we see what the big picture is. Again, it's more than us, and then just us individually. It's us as a whole. And so in Revelation chapter 7, this is the end game, right? This is in verse 9. After this, I saw a vast crowd too great to count, from every nation, tribe, and people, and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb. They were clothed in white robes and held palm branches in their hands, and they were shouting with a great roar. So this is like this echo of Exodus 24, because it's this loud voice, or great voice, and this is a loud roar. And this is what they're saying. Salvation comes from our God who sits on the throne and from the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living beings, and they fell before the throne with their face to the ground and worshiped God. They sang, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and strength belongs to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the 24 elders asked me, Who are these who are clothed in white? Where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you are the one who knows. And he said to me, These are the ones who died in the great tribulation. They have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb and made them white. That is why they stand in front of God's throne and serve him day and night in his temple. He who sits on the throne will give them shelter. They will never again be hungry or thirsty. They will never be scorched by the heat of the sun, for the Lamb on the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to the springs of life-giving water, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. So, I mentioned this, I think it was last week, that it's a lot bigger picture than an individual people. It's about bringing, like in Psalms 110:1 says, that it's to bring under all things under the authority of God, right? And there's a book that I have a review on called The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. If you want the shorter version, there's the more abbreviated version called Supernatural. And I think that this is just such a great book to give to somebody, especially new Christians. I think I'm going to do a video on that, like 5 books to give to new Christians, just because it sets the stage for the Bible. So you have to read the Bible in terms of that context. It's not just about individuals, it's about bringing all things and all people to God, right? So just yesterday I was in a here's the thing, this is why I don't go on Facebook very often. I usually only do it just to like give updates for people on, the journal when I need to, because that's like right now it's our kind of our main form of communication. But this is why I don't go on Facebook very often, because I usually make somebody mad when I do. So anyway, we had this someone that I know had posted something the day before about basically what he was saying was he was slamming John Lennon. Sorry, we have a political person in our area. His name James Lennon. But anyway, John Lennon, his song Imagine, and he was going on this whole long thing about, we shouldn't listen to it, this is a horrible thing, this is like atheist, Marxist, and communism, throwing all these isms in there. And so anyway, I made a post about just kind of the what's going on today. And I tagged him in it because he had just said this, because he does that a lot. He like equates capitalism with, he does do this. He doesn't like that I say this, but this is true. It's like he thinks that capitalism was like dictated by God, at Mount Sinai. It wasn't. Like if you look in the Levitical laws, it's closer to distributism. Capitalism and socialism actually comes out of the Enlightenment, which is this, this idea of, it's about self, and that is really the main focus. That's not God's economic system. Everything that we have comes from God. God gives it all to us, right? And so when we are, if he gives us a blessing, it's so that we can do his will in a particular way. So we need to be able to lay it all down for him. And so anyway, but it was when I had read that, his initial post, it was just so bizarre to me how somebody can see things so completely different. Because yes, Lennon actually in the lyrics, he actually says, "Imagine there's no God," right? Well, here, one of the things that I want we need to keep in mind that there's usually reasons that people have ideas about things, right? And so this is true of Karl Marx. This is true of John Lennon. They saw a lot of injustice and wrongs, and the church was being a very poor witness. And so they see, maybe when they see all these wars or this oppression that's facilitated by the church, they see that religion is as the problem. The problem isn't God. The problem isn't religion. The problem is us. The problem is our fallen human nature. If you don't understand that at the core, that's the issue, all your solutions are going to be off, right? So when I hear that song, I hear a longing for peace and for fellowship. And Solomon actually says that God has put eternity in our hearts, right? And so it's this desire for fellowship and communion, and it's not only fellowship and communion with God, but with other people. And that's what he's talking about in that song. He just doesn't know how to find it, right? So I actually have like a really short video on my YouTube channel about America and the City on the Hill. And I talk a little bit about Augustine's The City of God when Rome was going through a very hard time. And, Augustine is saying true happiness can only be found in God. The goal is not happiness, right? That's just an outcome. The goal is God. And so we need to have that communion and fellowship, and that's how we can have true happiness. So Lennon didn't understand that, but his desire was good. It's just he didn't know the way to get there. And I actually wrote an essay on, it's called The Theodicy of Josh Whedon, or Serenity in the Theodicy of Josh Whedon. It's on an Unexpected Journal. I'll link to it. But it's about, basically it's about Alvin Plantinga's free will defense, and how Josh Whedon, who's an atheist, actually illustrates that in Serenity. So Alvin Plantinga is this amazing philosopher. He's basically, for the problem of evil, he's basically answered it. And this movie, to me, like when I was doing my reading for my philosophy of religion class, and we were reading God, Freedom, and Evil, I actually if I had the book, I could show you my notes. I actually wrote in there Serenity. So my background before I went into the apologetics program was not, I had very little experience in, reading in philosophy. But I understood that, concept because I had seen that movie Serenity. It made sense to me because I had seen that. And so I wrote an essay on our last year's summer issue called, I wrote an essay on that. And I actually started out with John Lennon's Imagine, right? So anyway, but his vision, his great vision of this fellowship and community is actually an echo of Isaiah 35. So Isaiah is giving this prophecy. The Jews are going into exile, and he's saying there's going to be judgment, but this is a promise. This is a promise of redemption. And this chapter is titled in my Bible, Hope for Restoration. Even the wilderness and the desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom with spring crocuses. Yes, there will be an abundance of flowers and singing and joy. The deserts will become as green as the mountains of Lebanon, as lovely as Mount Carmel on the plains of Sharon. There the Lord will display his glory, the splendor of our God. So Isaiah is prophesying a time when we can be in fellowship with God. We can, all of us, can see him face to face, right? With this news, strengthen those who have tired hands and encourage those who have weak knees. So they're going through a hard time, right? But Isaiah is promising them a better time is coming. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear. For your God is coming to destroy your enemies. He's coming to save you. And when he comes, he will open up the eyes of the blind and unplug the ears of the deaf. The lame will leap like a deer, and those who cannot speak will sing for joy. Springs will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams will water the wasteland. The parched ground will become a pool, and springs of water will satisfy the thirsty land. Marsh grass and reeds and rushes will flourish where desert jackals once lived, and a great road will go through that once deserted land. It will be named the Highway of Holiness. Evil-minded people will never travel on it because they're not going to be there. This is in the new heaven and the new earth. It will only be for those who walk in God's ways. Fools will never walk there. Lions will not lurk along its course, nor any of the other ferocious beasts. There will be no other dangers. Only the redeemed will walk on it. Those who have been ransomed by the Lord will return. They will enter Jerusalem singing, crowned with everlasting joy. Sorrow and mourning will disappear, and they will be filled with joy and gladness. So that's the end, right? This is a picture of what we see at the very end of Revelation. And so I think that I had one of the other things I was listening to this week is a sermon by Robert Morris, and I'll have to link to it. I don't even remember what the title of it was. This is the only thing I remember from it. But he was talking about what eternal things are, what is really important. And I think that that's one thing that we need to focus on during this time. And what he said is that he would look at everything around him. He said, that'll burn. That'll burn. So, Jesus talked about in the New Testament, in one of his teachings, that everything is going to be judged. And some things are, we're hay and stubble, and they'll, be consumed in the fire. But we have to look at, what our work has been that has been eternal. And really the only eternal thing, this is what Robert M. Morris pointed out, the only eternal thing are the people around you. So regardless of what else comes in the upcoming week, we have to remember that this isn't the end game. This isn't the end. This isn't all there is. And that we need to be, keeping our eyes in Jesus. And in Hebrews 12, 12:2 is the author and finisher of our faith. We need to put most important the things that have eternal value, and those are the people around us. So anyway, that is enough for today, and I hope that you are all healthy and at peace, and we'll just, next week we're going to be talking more about Passover, so we're going to backtrack a little bit and talk about that. So anyway, let's just end this time with a prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for this time and for this day, Lord. I plead the blood of Jesus over every person that listens to this message, Lord, and I thank you that you are a good God who provides for all our needs, who we can go to for safety and for peace. And I thank you, Lord, that even in this time where there is uncertainty, that we can have peace in you. So, Lord, help our unbelief, help our doubt. Thank you for using this time to point out those things that we are putting above you, that we have more trust in, and help us. Just thank you for giving us your grace to really come to fully trust in you. I thank you for all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, I will see you next time.